Lil Lunch Meat. I'm from Crenshaw Mafia. You know what I'm saying? Bang, bang, bang.
Welcome to Boys in the Hood TV. Today we're going to be discussing the life of Lil Lunch Meat from the Crenshaw Mafia Bloods. Now, Lil Lunch was born in Trayvon in 1978. He would grow up in Inglewood, California. Now, as a kid, he and his family stayed in the Ville on 104th Street, which is located in the notorious Crenshaw Mafia Bloods hood. Now, Trayvon would be raised into the gang lifestyle. His mother was from A. Trey Hoover's, and his father was from the Denver Lanes. And they both met while in high school. Now, as a child, Lil Lunch would see a lot of gang violence, and it would be a normal, everyday occurrence for him. His grandmother and aunt would try to keep him away and shield him from the gang lifestyle. So as a kid, he would go to church every Sunday and even sing in the choir. And by the age of 11, he would get put on to the Crenshaw Mafia Bloods. But he would soon get the moniker Lil Lunch Meat from his big homie, Big Lunch Meat, who would take him under his wing and teach him the game. Now, as a youth, he would commit various different crimes, from stealing, fighting, carjackings, and eventually he would start getting involved in selling dope. Now, mainly, Lil Lunch would sell weed, but if he got his hands on anything else more hardcore, he would definitely slang it. Now, Lil Lunch's life of crime would eventually start catching up to him, and he would be arrested and sent to YA in 1988. But being locked up, this wouldn't slow him down one bit. It would only add more fuel to the fire. But soon as he touched back down on the streets, he would get even deeper into the gang life. He and his cousin Bandit would be running the streets together. And in 1992, he would get that bad news that his older cousin, Big Laniac from the Denver Lanes, had been shot and killed by the Campanella Pyrus during a drug deal. Now, this news would only make Lil Lunch more of a savage in that street life, and he would turn it up. Now, although running the streets, Lil Lunch did attend Morningside High School in Inglewood, but school was not his main priority. Slanging dope and gangbanging was. Now, Lil Lunch was known for getting into fights, running fades with different Crip hoods on any and every occasion. One situation, Lil Lunch and his homies would pull up to a funeral service at a cemetery where the Crips was at. As soon as they walked into the cemetery, the Crips would pull out straps and start dumping. They would let off over 100 shots, and Lil Lunch and his homies would barely escape with their life. Now, even after this incident, he would continue living a reckless life, and he would start making a lot of enemies in the streets. Now, one of their main enemies at the time was the 10 Deuce Raymonds, who Lil Lunch and his homies would get into various shootouts anytime they ran into him. In one instant, he would get shot in his ankle, but he would survive the shooting. Now, in the 90s, with the 3-strike law being in effect, a lot of people will be getting life sentences over even the minor offenses, and they will never see the light of day on the street. But with Lil Lunch knowing this, he didn't care, because he knew signing up for this gangbanging lifestyle, he was willing to take that chance and risk it. But also in the 90s, all hell would break loose between the Bloods after Lil Lunch Meat homie, Tiptoe, would be gunned down by the neighborhood Pyrus. Now, his death would spark a vicious war amongst former allies, and this would be an extremely violent beef. Now, during this war, Lil Lunch Meat's reputation would start ringing bells due to him being extremely active, getting it cracking with any rival neighborhood. But with this type of reputation, it always comes with a price. And in 1996, Lil Lunch would be arrested in connection with the murder of 2 Crips. Now, at the time, he believed that the hard-time hustlers were the ones who had snitched on him, which got him locked up. Now, he would spend 4 months in county on these murders. He would soon be released due to lack of evidence. And of course, once he got back out, he was straight back in the set. Now, due to the violence at the time in Inglewood, the city leaders were hard at work to halt the violence. Now, most of the gang violence and drug dealings that was taking place was within an 8-mile radius of the Crenshaw Mafia's hood. So one of the first steps the city would take was hitting the Crenshaw Mafia Bloods with a gang injunction. And Lil Lunch Meat would be one of the 41 members named on that list. Now, during a civil court hearing, Lil Lunch Meat would ask the judge if the judge could give him the names of the officers who made these statements on him. And while in the process, have the officers take a lie detector test, because he believed he was being wrongfully targeted. But the judge would tell Lil Lunch Meat that if he wanted to fight this case, he would need to hire an attorney. By 1998, there would be a documentary on the gang violence in LA, which would include multiple Crip sets and Damu hoods, like the Denver Lanes and the Crenshaw Mafias. Now, Lil Lunch Meat would be included in this documentary, and during this interview segment, he would talk about beating those 2 murders, which took place back in 1996.
They had me for 2 murders, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, I beat them.
Is that right?
Yeah, they had me for 2 murders on some enemigos, some of them boys from over there. The hood times be snitching, man. Hard times is busters. Y'all niggas know what time it is on mafias, nigga. My niggas got beef with whoever. Whoever got beef with us, bring it on to the land. They blast at us about 100 times, yeah.
Now things will start getting hectic not long after the release of this DVD. On December 25th, 1999, Lil Lunch Meat would be on 66 in Raymond in the 6-7 neighborhood Crips hood. When out of nowhere, a vehicle would roll up and open fire, and Lil Lunch Meat would be hit. Now he would survive his injuries, but sometime later, somebody from the turf would end up giving up that shooter, who would soon be arrested for shooting Lil Lunch Meat. Now while in the hospital recovering, the detective would come to interview Lil Lunch. But during his interview, he would give them a false story that him and his girl were sitting there smoking in the car when out of nowhere, somebody opened fire on them. But he would let them know that he never saw the shooter. Now Lil Lunch will be called during the preliminary hearing to speak on the shooting. But once there, he would tell the prosecution that he had no idea who shot him, nor had he ever seen the man that was being accused of shooting him. So this will ultimately lead to the alleged shooter only being charged with being in possession of a firearm, but not for actually shooting Lil Lunch Meat. Now by the early 2000s, detectives were still investigating that murder of the 2 Crips who were shot back in 1996. They would soon get a tip from an anonymous source, and not too long after, Lil Lunch Meat would be arrested yet again for these same murders. But this time he will be charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 attempted murder. Now while locked up, Lil Lunch would discover that one of his own homies from the set was the one that was cooperating with the police, IDing him as the shooter. Now unlike before, there wasn't any witnesses, but this time, the charges would end up sticking. Now the DA would offer Lil Lunch a 15-year deal if he gave up the other alleged suspects that were tied to this murder. But being the gangster that he was, Lil Lunch Meat would refuse, and eventually that offer would be snatched off the table. And this would lead to Lil Lunch case now going to trial. Now that same homie from his set would take the stand against him during the trial. But after testifying, the homie would go up to Lil Lunch's mother and try to convince her that he had been forced by the police to testify against her son. And by the end of the trial, Lil Lunch Meat would be found guilty of 2 counts of murder and attempted murder. And he will be given 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Now by 2002, he will be transferred to High Desert in the midst of a race war. And sadly, while behind bars, dealing with all the drama there, he would miss the birth of his 2nd child, and also his mother would pass away. Now things would escalate by 2003, and a full race riot would break out, and Lil Lunch Meat would be stabbed, but ultimately he would survive his injuries. Now sometime later, Lil Lunch Meat would start having issues with his own hood after that same Crip who allegedly shot him would arrive at the same prison. Now once there, that Crip would start telling people that Lil Lunch Meat had snitched on him. And for some reason, a lot of his homies and other blood hoods would start believing this story that Lil Lunch Meat was a snitch. And this would lead to drama with Lil Lunch getting into scuffles with his own homies. But eventually, it would come out that that Crip was lying on Lil Lunch Meat. And he was an actual rat himself who had paperwork. Now decades later, around 2020, Lil Lunch Meat would find himself in a deadly situation in prison. He would get into an argument with a Mexican inmate, and Lil Lunch Meat would end up stabbing him 14 times. Now, although the victim survived, this situation would lead to Lil Lunch Meat being hit with another charge, and he would find himself doing 6 months in the hole. Now, while in the hole, he would get more bad news that his aunt, who took care of him, had passed away. Now, soon, Lil Lunch Meat would realize that gangbanging had cost him everything that he loved. Now, as of today, Lil Lunch Meat is still fighting his case and is currently speaking out against gang violence and trying to prevent a lot of younger kids and homies not to join the gang. I would like to thank everybody for tapping in, and I'll see y'all next time.